Hi there, welcome to this episode. We're going to look at this is footage that I graded for a kind of a demo test shoot for Nikon last year on their new Z9 with the Nikon RAW. It's not so new, but they wanted to do some tests for a show here in Taiwan. So it's kind of, the usual stuff. They go out to an environment, they shoot some people in the environment, and it gets edited together to some music. So it's a very simple job, but it'll kind of illustrate the typical process that we normally go through. It's very easy to just jump into Resolve and start working with what you have, but I think it's very important to just take a step first. Obviously there's the client calls you up, books in the job, and there's negotiations about pricing and all those kind of things. But assuming the job's a go-ahead, it's very important that you know what to ask for. So you'll need the raw files, you need the EDL or XML from the editor, you'll need a cutting copy reference small movie file with a burnt in time code and all those good things. You might need some references, color references, creative guidelines for the job, or it's a phone call with the cinematographer or with the director. So all of these things, it's good to ask more of those questions up front, try and get as much as you can in, and then put it in a folder. So what I've got here on, I normally take my main RAID, and I've got a media drive, all my source material that's coming in. So this is all this 2024 Nikon grade, and inside of that I'll have a folder for my camera raw files, maybe if I'm the logo, music, anything other that comes in, some references, the cutting copy and the XML file from the editor. I'll try to assemble it all in a structure exactly as I want it inside of Resolve, and I'll show you now why. So we open up Resolve. The thing is, by the time you get to Resolve, you're going to need to make some decisions. You're going to need to know frame rates and aspect ratio and resolution and all those things. So let's see what we can discover just from these files that we've been given. So if I just look at the cutting copy, great friend is media info. So I'm clicking on media info and I'm opening up the cutting copy file. So I can, it's low resolution, it's 1280 by 720, that's fine. But what I want to see here is what is the frame rate. So the editor has output something at 24 FPS, and presumably their timeline was in 24 frames a second. So that's the first thing I need to know. The other thing that you could look at is you can actually open up the XML. It's just a text file. There's nothing top secret about it. You can just right click on it and say open with, and then I'm on Windows here, so I'll just say Notepad or WordPad or something like that. And you can look through, you'll see all these fields. You can find, there we go, time based, 24 frames per second. And it'll tell you, is it drop frame or not, NTSC, all these things. And just within that first section, you'll be able to find out a lot, which is also a good thing to do. So we know 24 frames a second. So we're going to jump into Resolve and we're going to create a new project. Nikon grade 001, whatever. Create some name that's meaningful to you. Now I'm jumping into this folder with all the details, but let's have a look at our basic project settings. So we're probably going to be working in 4K. This is a demo for a camera manufacturer. They're going to want high resolution. Obviously this can be verified with the client. My system is set up in full, so the video levels, you've got to get that, however your monitor's calibrated, and 24 frames a second, most important thing, frame rate. Now this is not a small problem, it's a big problem, and it's a more relevant problem than it ever was with people shooting on cell phones and all sorts of formats. Very, very important to, ideally, you want to have your offline edit, timeline, and your source footage, and your online and your grade all at the same frame rate. As much as possible, keep it like that. That keeps your life a whole lot simpler. Other options that we're going to need to set here, just our color management, because we're going to be grading in DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate, but our output, so our timeline is a DaVinci Wide Gamut, and our output space is going to be Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 for standard definition. On Nikon RAW, so we should look at the RAW parameters for Nikon, and we'd like to set it ourselves. The white balance will be as shot. Their standard is to decode to Rec 2020 and Nikon log for their RAW files. and I'll just in case on set they did any exposure and other adjustments, I'll tick those for now, but if there are any problems, I'll adjust accordingly. So we can save. You can either pull the XML first and then pull in media, or automate, do it all in one step process. But what I like to do is I like to have the right media in the right place, and that makes the conform a little bit simpler. So the first thing I'll do is I'll pull in the camera raw material, and I want to keep the folder structure, so I'll add maintaining the folder structure, because this is 120 frame a second source. It's going to be helping me. The first time I pull footage in, it's going to be saying, do I need to change the project frame rate? I don't want it to, so I'm going to say don't change. So now I've got this 120 frames a second. So now on this job, I've got an agreement with the offline editor that prior to them working and prior to me working, as we pull it into the system, we're going to change it over to 24 frames a second. Now, prior to any of this footage being on a timeline, it's actually very simple. You can select it all, you can right click, and under the clip attributes, you can select all and say change to 24 frames a second. Now this, you shouldn't always do this. This must be discussed first, and it has to be consistent. Whatever is done for the offline and whatever files are given to the offline editor must be the same as what goes for the grade and the online. Now in this case, I'm going to make my life simple. I'm going to keep everything at the timeline frame rate, which is 24 frames a second, and go. And if you try those two options, you'll see the durations will change, the time codes will change. So it has to be done prior to any editing starting. So in this case, this is how it was done, so I'm including that step, but you may not need to do that step. Other than that, I'll need to pull in the cutting copy. So I'm going to pull this folder in. There's some older versions which are in there. I'm going to just get rid of those because I know we don't need those. But in one level up, we've got a cutting copy. So let's have a look. Let's have a quick look at the cutting copy. Oh, so you can see that they've burnt in time code on screen, which is great, wonderful. On the left corner, I've got the source clip name. It's a MOV, so obviously it'll be a similar name, but it'll be the NEV Nikon RAW that I'm looking for to look at now. But the editor was using small converted files, so they're MOV. But the beginning of the file name should be exactly the same. And ideally, if things have been done correctly, the source time code will be relevant, just in case there's any issue on the conform. So yeah, we've got several shots in this desert environment. The brief that I've been given is that they want to make it look like a certain Hollywood movie that was also in a desert, and we're going to do that. Obviously with some creative license, we're not going to make it exactly the same. Obviously these two productions were shot on very different budgets, but it's good to always look through the cut, get an idea of the flow, get an idea of the story, know what you're in for. Looking at the cutting copy, I'll realize that I'll also need the music. So let's pull that in. We can either use the cutting copy, or there's a music file that's been supplied by the client. So I'll pull that folder in as well. And there we go. We've got our WAV file for the accompanying music. So now I can import the XML file. So import timeline, and I'll go on my media drive to the Nikon folder, XML and cutting copy, and then there's my XML file that's come from the offline editor. So import, and there are lots of automated settings, so be a little careful here. It says automatically set project settings, and no, I don't want it to do that for me. Automatically import source clips into the media pool. Well, I've actually done that already. You'll see that my approach is very much be kind of in control of the process. Might be an old and boring approach, but I want to know exactly what it's doing. Automation might help, but it also might confuse you. So I like to keep it very simple, but I would like to keep the sizing information that's in the XML. If the editor's done any resizes, I'd like to keep those. So then I say OK. So now we look through folders and see what are we going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point it towards the Nikon RAW and to the music, and just not to this cutting copy file because we don't want to connect to that. So let's say OK. And there we go. It kind of, for some reason, couldn't connect to the music file. I can force it to connect. Let's see if we can get that right. I can just say conform lock with the clip, and I can force, because I also know the placement. I know it's in the beginning of the track, but so anyway, that's if you've got the information, but you can also take the music from the cutting copy. Also, I see Resolve's put the timeline file in this folder where I was parked, so let's move that up to the top. And also there's a slight, just a little organizational thing. See, it's actually put these all inside each other, so these should actually be sitting up to the top level and music. So there I've got my master level with my timeline, and then I've got camera raw, cutting copy, and music laid out like that. Right, so we can check our conform. Again, there are automated ways to do this, but I like to be very old-fashioned, and it's basically just because it's like a clip on the, if you take your cutting copy in like a clip on the timeline, then you can manipulate it and place it how you want. There are automated methods, you can pull it in as a reference, but I like to take the offline file and just put it over the top. You can, if it's a long project, you can also scene cut this first before pulling it in, but this is just about 70 seconds long. It's quite simple. There are about 18 edits, so I'm just going to do it like that. And we could increase the track height here just so we can see a bit more. We could look at the audio as well, and the audio looks great, looks fine, no problem. And now, normally with this reference file, we'd put it over at 50% opacity over the top, and then we can check our edits. Stepping through or playing through are both good options, but basically we can use the D key to enable or disable, and we can check if we're on the correct frame in each case. You'll get used to this process. You'll see that if things are out, you'll see that it'll jump when you switch, but the two files, the offline reference material and the 8K raw file are all aligned. So you can step through like this, and obviously you need to check that your edit points change at the same time, as well as each cut is the same. So I'll play it all the way through, checking if there are any errors. Okay, so that looks good. You can leave this offline file here, but I'm going to stash it. I'm going to move it out to the end, and I'm going to disable it just so it doesn't affect our grading process. Assuming that I've got a grading brief from the client, and they wanted to make it look like a certain Hollywood movie that's shot in the desert, and then maybe they would send images, but I'm not going to pull them up now for copyright reasons. But let's just say I've got in my mind a nice brief from the client, and maybe we're working remotely, so I'll prep a version, then send it to them, and we'll have some either online feedback sessions, or alternatively, if they're coming to sit with you in person, then that all happens live. But ideally, you've got some time up front to just prep a version first, or 2 or 3 versions. It depends how you like to work. Always good to have time. You don't want the client sitting around while you're doing this conforming process and all that kind of thing. Ideally, prep the session first and let them walk in when there's actually something to see. They're not seeing you doing the behind the scenes stuff that should be all done by the time they walk in. We'll use this shot first, let's say. Looking at the raw file here, looks pretty burnt out to me. So now maybe this is I can also see on the waveform here, I can see this kind of, this is like white fabric, but yeah, it looks clipped to me. I'll look through a couple of these other files. A little bit kind of there, but yeah, definitely the sign of these clipped whites. So now this is a bit concerning, right? What is this? Obviously they went out to do a camera test on a new camera format, so yeah, there could be problems, but there's stuff that you might need to feed back to the client. So we could jump into the camera raw settings, we could go to clip level, and we could see on the exposure, like what happens if we pull down the exposure on the raw file? Can we get anything back? And you'll see that nope, there's nothing more that comes back in that highlight detail. So that if I reset, then maybe this highlight setting, maybe there's something there to get. I mean, to me that just looks like it's rolling in on itself. I mean, maybe that's giving a tiny bit, but this looks clipped to me. So at this point, like a bit of a warning signal, and I'd be contacting the client, and then maybe there'd be a discussion, and maybe they'd feed back to me, said, oh yeah, we actually we wanted to shoot overexposed as a test or something. But anyway, that's the situation, and they want you to do the best you can with this footage. So let's see as we go. So I've got my standard power grades or starting points. I mean, this one is actually a DaVinci wide gamut starting point. So first thing I need to do is always check my color management. This preset was for ARRI, so I'm just going to switch it over to the Nikon settings, which is Rec 2020 and Nikon log, N-log. On the input here, I'm coming from Nikon log to DaVinci wide gamut, and then I'll be doing my grading in the middle here. And then at the last node in my timeline, I'm going to be going from DaVinci wide gamut to Rec 709 gamma 2.4, which is my display space. So yeah, I can confirm that definitely looks very burnt out. Assuming there's nothing I can do in the raw settings here, so I'll try that, but let's assume that couldn't get anything better. First thing is we should do some either linear gain, or I'm just going to use the HDR tool here. I've been talking lots of smack about the HDR tool, but getting used to it now, there is actually some useful stuff. And the thing I really like is this, the global exposure, because it's in stops. And if you've set up your timeline color space correctly, then it works very well and photometrically and all of that. So looks like this is what I'm going to need to doing here. I mean, this is almost minus 2.5, 2.6 stops. That kind of gets us into a better range, but you can see that the whites are still clipped. That's going to be an issue that we're going to have to try and deal with. For the look, what I'm going to do is use the Filmverse plugin as my general look, and I'm going to add some tweaks on top of that. We want DCTL, and then I'm going to load the Filmverse plugin. That's the default setting of the Filmverse plugin. From there, we can start working. So I can see that over and above this exposure issue, which obviously we were way too bright, and I've pulled it down. Naturally, the footage has got a slight, it's kind of a warmish tint. In the base setting, the Filmverse is giving it a bit of yellow, maybe too much yellow for what I'd like for this particular reference. So what I'm going to be doing here, first thing I do when I'm tweaking my Filmverse is maybe S-curve contrast, could be some of the S-curve intensity, could be some of the things that I could look at first, or the highlights, maybe something I'd tweak up or down. But often it's a case of what you see first, that's what you tweak first. And now just this yellow cast I'd like to remove a little bit. So in terms of the look that's into the highs, I'm going to just cool it down a little bit. And then the wash that's in the bottom end, I'm going to maybe increase a little bit. So go a little bit more to our blue into the blacks. And that's kind of interesting. So the Filmverse has done quite a lot. I mean, because of this white here, we've pulled things down. But, it's quite dark on her face. And obviously the main issue here is going to be face. Storytelling-wise, we want to see clearly into the face. We want to see eyes, and we want to see expression. So I can see that in the ratios that I've been presented with here, I'm probably going to be lifting the face and maybe dropping everything else down. Or maybe set this as a global exposure and then lifting the face up on top of that. Yeah, maybe we do some general color balance, and I could do this because this is probably going to apply to most shots. I could do some lift gamma gain adjustments just to tweak the overall tone and balance. And now this is just your the feel of it, where you feel the skin tone should sit, mid-tones, small tweaks in the blacks, the lift gamma or the gain. Maybe, because this is more of, it needs to be in more an earthy kind of feel, I might also do a saturation profile on this. I might want to just limit the high saturations, not let them be too saturated. I mean, you can see on my histogram here, I don't have, it's very low saturation. There's nothing electronic or highly saturated or things like that. So could check where the skin tone is. Skin is kind of there. So maybe lower than that, I'd want to maybe boost it a little bit. But upward of that, I'd want to be just, it's almost like an envelope. You know, I'd want to just taper in and just not let anything get too saturated. Keep it quite naturalistic. The skin tone anchor point, that's kind of staying neutral. Lows, I'm increasing a bit and then tapering off. So yeah, that could be just a very subtle adjustment. See how it's pulling in a little bit of the peak saturations there. Might have, be more applicable on other shots. For my personal taste, I do like split toning. Confession, right? I'm a split tone junkie. So the version that I'm going to prep now, I'm going to go a little bit more. So you could go more in the Filmverse side, or I'm going to do just in a separate node here after the Filmverse plugin. I'm going to add a little bit of extra split toning because it's always it's the way I've worked for many years, and I do like to just have this little tweak over and above any plugins, like a manual tweak that's going to take it a little bit further. Okay, I mean, it's not a big change. Kind of cooling the blacks, but maybe in this desert environment, a slight warming in the blacks, maybe. That could be something you could consider, and then that would be a negotiation with the clients. But I'm just going to slightly move to a more brownish coffee color that's not too yellow. But yeah, these are very little subtle tweaks. It's important to save stages, so let me just show you what I mean by that. So I've already gone a few steps now. So what I should probably do is, before I get too ahead of myself, obviously, I mean, if you want to save this and show the client where the problem was, but that's something that must be done with care. You don't want to rub their nose in it. You want to say, it was a bit overexposed, I've really helped you, but this is, I've already helped you get to something more normal, but we're still going to have to deal with the highlights. So you're going to have to talk the client through this process. So let's say adjusted color management. You could save this as a stage. So I'll save a still frame of that, and then let's say these 3 steps. So the saturation window, the Filmverse plugin, and my extra little split tone. That's going to be my first attempt, my look number 1, and I'll save a version of that. So now we're in a situation where you can talk them through the story. You can say, this is where I started out, I did some adjustments, and I got to this. And you can lead them through the process if they're sitting next to you, or these options that you can send if you're sending versions, or if you're doing a remote approval. Very important to have these social skills, that you can lead the client through the process, and you can negotiate and just basically, maybe it's overstating to say you like proving your worth or showing what you're doing and things like that. But it's you can't just say, here's the start, now I'm done, pay me my money. That's not going to go down well with most clients. It's kind of a process, and you've got to feel like you've worked and you've tried options, and something great came out of it. You've inspired. They've given you a reference. You've come up with your own inspiration, and in the creative mix, you've come up with something that all of you like, ideally. So yeah, it's a process, and it's a very much important to have these social skills to work through this creative collaboration with clients. It's the main part of the job. Right, so 2 issues now. I think we should lighten the face. Also the client, we've discussed the issue with the whites, and there's nothing we can do. They can't reshoot. This is the footage we've got, and we've just got to go with it. We couldn't save anything in the raw parameters. So a trick that I might use here, in this node, I'm going to rename it to be the highlights. And what I'm going to do here, which might help, because I can't get detail back, but I just want to lose this flat clip. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to key the whites, and I'm just going to try and get a bit of shape into them. Because if you're familiar with the way highlights normally function, is that they kind of go up to peaks, and now we've got the peaks all chopped off. So I'm going to try and artificially recreate those peaks, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of the white areas that I want to select. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a blur to create those peaks. So you can see on the waveform from where I was there, where the peaks are flat in this key, this black and white key of the highlights. I'm going to put a big blur, so like 700 or in Resolve numbers And you can see how I've got these peaks back here. These kind of, the black and the white are fading into each other in a gradation, and I'm getting a bit of, so it's totally fake. It's not the actual picture information coming back, but I'm going to try that. I'm going to actually try and lift the gain up in those areas, and you can see that it does kind of make the signal, resuscitates the signal to make it slightly brighter in the middle here and darker. Obviously it's not so much light related, but more geometry related, so it's a fake, it's not ideal, but slightly better there. I mean, now we can say, okay, maybe once we've done that little stretch in the highlights, all the highlights should come down. So now you can treat it, okay, now this is my footage, and now I'm doing a global adjustment to hold highlight detail or something like that. You can work out where you want your highlights to sit. But so that would be a quick fix on the burnt out highlights problem. Now for the face, you can see I'm labeling my nodes. So this is going to be a local area adjustment. This is all my look, and this is applied to the entire shot. So a local adjustment, I'd like to simply put them in this parallel stack unless there's something more complicated that needs to be done. So yeah, a circular window. I'm going to keep it very simple. I don't want to get into too much, tracking and fine details like that. So just a nice soft window like that. We can use the global exposure because that's logical. That's photometric, and that will behave correctly. So I can lift those up. That's just lightening the face all over, so checking the scopes. That's kind of it. And just the general feeling is that things that are darker would recede from the viewer, things that brighter would come forward. So we've got all this white fabric that's kind of pushing out, and we're kind of ignoring the face. So we've got to kind of push that back a bit, lighten the face, just a relative adjustment to lighten the face and bring it out. Over and above doing a global adjustment here, you can work out, is it more, if you're using lift game again, if that's your weapon of choice, then you can work out, is it more the black end of the signal that needs to be lifted, so into the darker parts of the eyes, or is it the whites? Is it the skin tone that we want to be lifting up more, or the blacks? That's something that you can work out the balance for. Unfortunately, it's a thing. I try and resist this kind of thing as much as possible, but I know with this kind of job, because we're shooting lots of close-ups, they're going to be saying, oh, can we soften the skin? Can we do some so-called beauty work? I try and keep that to a minimum, because I think it's a very slippery slope if that becomes the standard for all, typical productions are always beauty work, and, it's kind of, social issues, but we can talk about all of that another day. But like a very simple skin work, nothing fancy, I would just do something like this. So on this node, again, just going to be the skin. We're going to pull a simple key on the skin tone. So I'm going to use the dropper here on the forehead. And you see with the use of keys, I'm kind of also very old-fashioned. I just mostly, 9 times out of 10, I'll always be using the HSL key. Way more robust, not as fancy, but mostly it gets you there, and you'll get a sense of when it is going to work, when it's not going to work. You can see how I'm pulling the key. Once I've made my selection, I narrow down my selection, and then I rock it side to side to find, I want it to center on the face. So go one way, oh, it's going off. So I come back, oh, it's looking good, oh, starts to get worse. So it's like focusing a camera, you're rocking in backwards and forwards to find the sweet spot. And then you can tweak the width after that. So that's kind of what the hue parameter can give me. Always good to check what luminance can do, because the luminance channel is always the cleanest, and it does a much great job at getting a nice key, and it can save the hair and the eyeballs, because we don't want to soften the black areas, we want to just soften the skin. And the highlights, maybe we can do a little bit of separation off the fabric. So something like that. So luminance can help us out a bit. Maybe saturation, but often saturation. Oh, okay, I'll take that back. Saturation, you're helping. I was going to say often saturation is not much help in keying. But yeah, with this Nikon RAW, pretty good. Lots of detail in there, except for the clip. but that was a a choice on set rather than something a defect in the raw file. For this price bracket, sure, yeah, if the camera was 5 times the price, then you could maybe demand that it holds way more stops of latitude, but in this price range, this Nikon RAW is pretty good. Okay, so this is a rough HSL isolation. So I'm going to clean up the key a bit, because this key doesn't need to be very precise, and the adjustment that we're going to be doing inside it is quite soft. So I can clean the white speckles out, clean the black speckles out, and always good to play it to check what it's going to be like on the run. Not much noise, looks pretty good, but if there was, I'd be using the denoise and other things like that. Okay, so mostly keyed out the skin, and I'm just going to simply do like a -30 or something on the mid detail. A very quick and simple softening of the skin, nothing fancy. Other things you could do is maybe lower the contrast a little bit. Could lower contrast, but bear in mind that that's going to adjust saturation levels, but maybe that's what you want. So the combination of these two, lightening the face and softening the skin slightly, that's kind of going to probably be a good ballpark for what we want here. The client has also asked to be just like that Hollywood movie and can we do some interesting stuff with the eyes? Okay, so you don't roll your eyes when they say that, you say, great, I'll give it a try. Let's see what we can do. Now, I'm just going to put the shot on loop and play it. So I'm watching the whole shot, very little movement. If you're doing little masks on the eyes, you will need to track, but there's no changes of angles. So yeah, we're in with a good chance here. It's a nice simple shot, so you can start wherever you want, the beginning, the middle, wherever you think's the best representation for the most of the shot. You might be getting into a bit of windowing work here, where we would be rotating, roughly rotating the eyes. Now, rotating is a whole other thing, and I only claim to be able to do a level that's suitable for a colorist. Rotoscoping for composite is a whole nother thing, so I'd hate to claim that I know everything about it, but simple functional stuff that a colorist needs to do, I've kind of got very used to doing over the years. So something like that, a little bit of soft, and you can work out your own strategy for how it would be. We are now going to put a little bit of blueness into that, because we want this magical effect of the eyes going a little blue. So we could actually even pull the color boost down. So desaturate the source, the natural color. Let's soften that a little bit. And maybe just put a touch of extra blue in there. And we can zoom right up and check. Alright, so let's label this node. Not too bad. I mean, it leaks onto the skin a little bit there. So yeah, I mean, this can take a long time to finesse, but at this stage I'd be kind of fairly quick with it. Quick check, is it a possibility? Can it work? If it's kind of, because people have an idea, but when they actually see it implemented is when they'll actually give you the feedback, the yes or no. So always do a quick version first, and we could track this in for the one eye, and yeah, like I said, there's no rotation or anything. That one's nice and simple. So let's jump over to the other eye. I'm going to add another curve. Again, zoom in. You can also do this mode. You can do Shift F to draw your keyframes, which is nice. You can use all your screen real estate. Ooh, okay, do we include the hair or not? Fun thing about rotoing out eyes here is when the person blinks, then what do? Your little window has to blink as well, which is a lot of fun. Alright, so this isn't a rotoscoping tutorial. I'm just going to keep it very simple. Go back and then put a bit of soft edge, outer and inner. And maybe tweak the size inwards ever so slightly. Alright, and let's track that in as well. Bear in mind that client might ask for handles. They'd add like an extra second at the top and bottom when you're actually exporting. So this track has to be continued over and above the part that's being used in the edit. So that's also something that needs to be communicated with the client before the final export. Okay, so this is kind of where we are. Again, this burnout white, we're just going to have to deal with it. It's got it slightly better, slightly more natural. Maybe to get more focus here, if we start looking wider here and looking at the environment, possibly we could do some shaping of the overall shot, and we could darken the edges down a little bit. I mean, this is obviously highly used and overused, but maybe this can help us in this situation. And I'll just use good old lift gam again, pulling down the outside a little bit, and maybe softening the window a little bit more. And then you can work out if that's good or not. You can also take off the window outline on your main monitor. Alright, so let's just say that that's my rough version. I'm going to now save that, and I can be doing, as long as because I've done tracking now, I've got to make sure I apply my keyframes, they don't disappear. If I do this, I could go back to stage 1, stage 2, and now stage 3 with the face, and you can see how we're changing the dimensionality of the image. And this could be your first shot, and then you'd probably want to communicate with the clients at this stage. Assuming they're happy, then you would be taking the setting and pasting it onto other shots, and then see how you go. Again, when we're pasting the across, we wouldn't need some of these adjustments initially. We'd want to check how they apply. Prior to getting into too much of the nitty-gritty, I'm going to have a look at some of the other shots on the timeline. Like this shot here, where we've got a bunch of sky, because in the first shot we said we didn't have sky. It was all about skin tone and eyes, so it was good for setting that. But yeah, let's see how it applies here, where we've now got the sky. So this scene grade, I'm going to keep it consistent for the all of this location. We do have a kind of interior location which might have a different scene grade, but I'm going to use this node up front here, this match node in the beginning, to do any other adjustments. Depending how you like to work, you could just be using global exposure as you get to the new shot. Just do your tweaks here. Obviously keep checking to your reference. Yeah, too dark and not warm enough. So we can compare skin tone to skin tone. We could compare sand to sand. See the warmth here. We're still, I think we're too cold on the wide shot. Look at your vector scope, look at your parade, and just adjust a bit, nudge it over, adjust a little more, and keep going like that. Slowly nudging it. Let's see what our white, we've still got this issue. I mean, this shot is clipped a whole lot less, but our white burnout effect, I mean, it does put some dimensionality back into the clouds. Again, not so ideal, but yeah, I think I'll keep it in for this. You can see on her legs there and on the white, it's, someone who's had experience will know that that's actually a clip. But yeah, we're doing the best to try and cover up for it. Now, the new issue that's come in is this sky color. So yeah, what are we going to do with the sky? Now, we could, based on this, we could say, okay, this whole job, like all the blues, based on what we're seeing in the sky, would need a bit of a tweak, and we're going to do something interesting. So you can see where the blue is. You could use a default, on the hue versus hue curve. Quite a good habit to actually move it to the point of interest. You'll get the most effect. Stay away from things that you don't want to adjust. You can set up your position of your vector first, and then where do we want to go? Do we want to go this way? Do we want to go this way towards blue? And notice this. See how I've moved it there into be directly opposite the orange of the sand and the skin. So that's one thing. I mean, going more, bending it the other way, obviously a bit too crazy, but you know, you've now, if there's a straight line through of opposite complementary colors, we've now moved that side. Okay, way too much. Or we could go straight there where it's the same color, you know, or sorry, the exact opposite, 180 degrees apart. Or we could swing the other way, and we could make it skin and then to a greener kind of sky color. Saturation is maybe getting a bit too much, but the hue is quite interesting, you know, if we want it to be a bit greener. So we could jump over to the sat curve and do a similar thing. Get our node on top there. Reducing a little bit, reducing a touch. So yeah, I mean, what do we think of that? That's our unadjusted sky, which isn't bad, I must say. And that's with it lessened and turned slightly greener. Let's see if we go even more greener. So yeah, this would be, you would normally propose a version, a suggestion to the client, and then it would be a bit of a negotiation. And for now, let's just say that's what we like, what we've settled on. Possibly we could give some dimensionality to the sky. So maybe it could be something here in the foreground and something up in the sky. But for the purposes of being quick, let's just do a bit of shading top and bottom, and we're going to fit it in with the environment, you know, with the angle of this piece of land here, and narrow it in a little more and darken it in a little more. And you could work out a soft edge and a positioning and a size and an amount of darkening that works for you. But let's just say, okay, that's what we like, and that's what we're going to go with for now. Always good to check it on the move. Okay, obviously the eyes are too small. We wouldn't be doing the eyes here. Face, probably wouldn't need to do that as well. So maybe for shots that have got the sky, we'd take this as our reference. So now we've got one face close-up in this one environment, one out on the dunes here, seeing the sky. We've got a second setting. And yeah, based on this, we'd start, if the client was happy, we'd send these to the client, get some feedback, and then we'd start working. So we'll leave it here for this video and continue in the next episode. You can see that getting the media organized, the client briefings, the conform, and setting the look can take a significant amount of time. In the next video, we'll set the look for the remaining scenes and do the balancing through all the remaining shots. We'll also look at how to quickly deal with client feedback at the later stages of the job and to get everything all wrapped up. Also, I wanted to let you know that we'll be holding live online courses this year. In the video description below, there's a link to a short questionnaire. Fill it in if you're interested in further training, and let us know at what stage of your career you're at and what topics you would most like to learn about. Also, which time zone you're in so we can schedule accordingly. This will give you access to early bird discounts. Looking forward to hearing your feedback, and we'll see you on the next video.